pops up around Facebook or other nooks on the internet. A whole bunch of girls in princess dresses, sparkly and colorful, and then right there in the middle, batgirls. And it says, in a world full of princesses, dare to be Batgirl. Now, I personally don't think this is an endorsement of Marvel over Disney. Instead, I read it as an endorsement of this little girl's courage to be different. Imagine you are this kid, dressed as Batgirl, and about to walk into a room full of princesses. How would you feel right here in the pit of your stomach? Maybe excited, but maybe too a little bit nervous. I have my own example of this. She's sitting right over there. Every year, Elisa, my daughter, thinks up a Halloween costume. And every year I have to make it. I'm not a person who sews, usually, not at all. But here we find ourselves. Once she was a flying unicorn. Last year, she was a rain cloud. But the year before last was her best costume yet. That's when she decided she wanted to be a candy bag. Now, usually I can at least find some inspiration on Pinterest or other sites like that, but there aren't actually many do-it-yourself candy bag costumes out there. Lucky for me, Elisa had very specific ideas for what she wanted. She wanted the costume to look like she was one giant trick-or-treat bag, and in the front, she wanted there to be like this invisible panel in which people could like throw the candy. So her candy bag costume was also her candy bag when she went trick-or-treating. It was very meta. On the front, it says, "Give me candy, please." And when she turned around, on the back, it says, "Thanks for the candy." It was really amazing. And even though I was the one sewing it and putting all the decorations on it, she was the mastermind behind all of it. And I think she really loved the finished version. However, as we were walking towards her school, she looked really nervous. And she seemed very unsure, and she took my hand. So later I asked her why she was feeling so nervous at that moment. And she said, "Well, I loved the costume, but I didn't know if the other kids would love it. I didn't know how they would react. Maybe they would laugh at me." So there was this fear that because she was being different, because she came up with this amazing costume, maybe she would end up alone. Of course, no one laughed at her. Everyone loved the costume. During the parade, she not only won the lucky pumpkin for her grade level, but during the following trick-or-treating, we got so much candy that year that I was eating it every night right up until Christmas. She actually doesn't like candy that much. She just gets it and then eats it. I believe that when Kurt Tucholsky talks about actually as a lifestyle or an outlook of life, a tendency to not fully live into ourselves, to not be or do what we can be or do. This fear of how others will react, a fear of being laughed at, isolated, ostracized, plays a real role. What if us being our full selves will lead to us being disavowed, unloved, and alone? This, in fact, is a common theme in so many stories and movies and films. Someone follows their heart, risks everything, and in the story, they always win everything, right? This is also how every story of every big leader and every prophet starts off. Instead of talking about prophets, though, let me talk about musical theater. Wicked, the musical, to be specific. There we go. It's a musical that provides a different view of the Wizard of Oz. Elphaba, the Wicked Witch, is not actually wicked, but just presented and perceived as such. By the way, there will be so many spoiler warnings in this sermon. If you haven't seen it yet, I apologize. So she's just perceived as wicked due to state propaganda. And then we have Glinda, the good witch, who is perceived as good, but in the musical she's also portrayed as very human, with all her strengths and all her flaws. And the wizard is still no wizard, but in this version he's also kind of a tyrant. So young Elphaba, who will later be known as the Wicked Witch, is a witch who's not only brilliant, but also green. And in the eyes of everyone else, a little weird. Despite her weirdness, she finds a friend in Glinda, the sparkly good witch, and together they have a chance to travel to the Wizard of Oz. Now, Elphaba had long wished to do so because she was thinking that in his greatness and his uniqueness, the wizard would embrace her in all of her difference and all of her weirdness. Instead, the wizard turns out to be a great disappointment and also a bit of a Machiavellian autocrat. So Elphaba chooses to follow her heart and risk it all. Her dream, her budding career, the one friend she has, even her safety. And as she's rising above it all, as she's defying gravity and singing this song that the choir so beautifully interpreted for us earlier, she sings, "And if I'm flying solo, at least I'm flying free." When presented the choice of being in community or freely being herself, she chooses the latter. And of course, in the end, everything turns out well. The wizard's evil plans are thwarted. Elphaba is united with her prince, who loves her not despite, but because she's different. She and Glinda make up, and Elphaba now lives a happy life in an isolated castle, far away, without anyone knowing that she's still alive. And given that I peg her as a strong introvert, I think that's the most important part of her happy ending. So in some ways, Wicked and so many other great stories and ideas and works of art tell us to have the courage to be weird, to be different, to follow our hearts and defy gravity. And where would we be if we didn't do that? At least sometimes. We would lose out on so much beauty in the world, creativity, change, innovation, progress. After all, we have never, as a human race, we would never have defied gravity, or crossed oceans, or built multi-storied buildings, or created musical theater, had it not been for those wonderful and wonderfully weird people with their big ideas who tried and tried and tried and failed and tried again. So, go out into this world, be yourselves, be different, be weird, right? But what if you don't want to be weird? What if you don't actually want to dream big, but you find comfort in the little things? A job well done, a regular structure, a good planned life that you have built for yourself and your loved ones. What if you don't want to be green, or Batgirl, or Candy Bag? What if Glinda is your jam and you actually enjoy the sparkly dress, the impeccable hair, the being popular, being liked and accepted by people, being in community? Kurt Tucholsky said that at times the facade does not fit our actually. It does not fit who we really long to be. And at other times our professed actually does not fit the life we chose to live. We profess an actually of difference because we don't want to admit that we're actually quite happy with the life that we built for ourselves. In the musical Wicked, it's not just Elphaba who briefly tries to fit in, trying to be popular by fixing up her hair and wearing flashy sunglasses. At one point, Glinda tries that too. She professes to a much more rebellious actually when she changes her name in support of a cause, not because she believes in it, but because she feels pressure to do so. She too wants to fit in, this time with the weird crowd. As the story progresses, she grows into her sparkly self just as much as Elphaba grows into her green self. And at the end, even though Elphaba was instrumental in dethroning the wizard, she could not have done it without Glinda. And what is more, Elphaba does not stay around afterwards to manage Oz. Instead, Glinda takes leadership, and given her popularity and the relationships she has built with the people of Oz, she's actually really good at it. In For Good, one of the most momentous and well-known songs from this musical, and spoiler warning, we'll hear it later, the two women sing about their friendship and how neither of them would have been able to fully grow into themselves if it hadn't been for knowing the other. After initially disliking each other for their differences, and then trying to focus just on their similarities, on making the other a little bit more like themselves, and then completely letting go of their friendship altogether because they deem each other too different. At the end, they are finally able to embrace each other in a close friendship, not despite, but because of their differences. Their heroic journey is not simply about growing into themselves fully, but also about accepting and celebrating difference, and about allowing themselves to be changed by that difference. And this story about embracing difference and about letting ourselves be influenced by difference is one that is far less often told. Much more often, we look for similarities, especially when we meet people whom we deem quite strange, quite different from ourselves. The safe choice seems to be to look for what connects us, what makes us similar. And sometimes that's a really good start, especially when we feel so threatened by each other that we fear we cannot even engage with each other civilly. This has been a common experience for many of us in the recent years. Finding what connects us when we feel so deeply divided is a valid strategy. And at times, finding those commonalities, however big or small they might be, can be pragmatic because we can accomplish a shared goal. At other times, too, the small commonalities can give us a feeling of comfort and safety. And sometimes we need comfort and safety. We really do. Think about it in terms of power. In traditional or hierarchical understandings of power, the person who's most powerful is the person who can influence others, the person who can set the norm and therefore make others like them. So in a way, focusing on similarity is a little bit like calling it a draw, right? It's agreeing on a power balance. We assume that essentially we are similar enough that neither has to force the other to be like them. And if seen like that, it's a strategy to keep the peace when peace isn't guaranteed. However, if we only look for similarities in the other, we will be left with nothing but the common denominator that we share. So we miss out not only on the greatness that the other might be, but we also make ourselves really small. We hide our actually and suppress our whole selves. We squeeze ourselves and the other into this cookie-cutter version because we fear that all that is outside of the established norms is too much for us to love and embrace, or it is too much of us to be loved and embraced. Lucky for us, as Unitarian Universalists, difference does not have to be as scary, because one of the tenets of our religion is that we embrace each other's differences in belief, as long as we agree to treat each other justly. In other words, everyone is welcome, but not every behavior is welcome. And we can be so open to differences because the first of our 7 principles promises similarity. Similarity on the greatest common denominator that there is, that every single person has inherent worth and dignity. If we remind ourselves of that ultimate similarity, we can stop searching so desperately for commonalities and instead focus and celebrate the differences. Because while commonalities can give us a sense of comfort, they don't always give us a sense of awe. And they don't change us. They don't inspire us to grow. We often focus on similarities because we want to show that someone who's completely different from us is not worse than us. They're just as good because they are like us. And that's a noble impetus. But if we only focus on the commonalities, we also cannot see that sometimes someone who's different from us may actually be better than us. We can't see if they have something to offer that can make us better too. I remember I once had a conversation with a friend of mine, a person of color. We were in a small group of people and we were talking about the protests in Ferguson a couple of years back. One person said something to the effect of so many white people getting really scared when they see black people or people of color protesting racism because they know that they, as white people, would do if they were treated with the same violence and injustice. And my friend became noticeably annoyed and upset. So this other person tried to explain and said, don't you see? I'm acknowledging racism. I'm acknowledging the deep unfairness. I'm saying that we as white people are scared by the anger and the rage because if we were treated like that, if our kids were treated like that, we would be really angry. We might even resort to violence to make that stop. And my friend said, yeah, I hear you. I get what you're saying. But you're still not seeing me in all of this. You're just seeing yourself and how you would react in that situation. I have no interest in vengeance or violence. I just want this cycle to stop. I just want to live my life with justice and peace. In this particular case, between those two individuals, a focus on similarity failed to see the love in my friend, the willingness to forgive, to stop the hatred. And focusing on similarities in that particular case led to focusing on a threat, on a continuation on violence, rather than the hope for something different, something better. Sometimes we have to be open to difference so that we are also open for the possibility for something better, something more peaceful, either in ourselves or in the world. Because it is when we are confronted with difference, not with similarity, that we may grow. And it is when we lean into our actually, when we let ourselves be our full selves, that we can inspire growth in others. Going back to the idea of power, the theologian Bernard Loomer calls this relational power. He defines relational power as the ability to both produce and undergo an effect. It is the capacity to both influence others and to be influenced by others. Relational power involves both a giving and receiving. We give to others, we receive from others, but at the same time we do stay true to ourselves. Ideally, this is what power and what relationships would look like in our beloved community. A giving and a receiving. We let ourselves be fully known and we appreciate each other, not just for our similarities, but also for our differences. And to put it once again in the words of Wickets, because we know each other, we are all changed for good. And if you're still worried that the change might go too far, that an unquestioned embracing of difference will lead to a loss of universal values, then here, once again, the first principle comes in not just as our starting point for exploration, but also as our ever-present safeguard. Because in the tumult of difference and change, everyone's inherent worth and dignity is still central. Difference, even radical difference, is okay as long as it does not threaten anyone's inherent worth and dignity as human beings. Again, everyone is welcome, but not every behavior is welcome. if we take the first principle as our true cornerstone for our beloved community, at the starting point and the safety net, then within these boundaries we can freely and absolutely lean into our actually and explore who we are, both ourselves and each other. We do not have to choose between freedom and community. We can have both. In that beloved community of people who respect each other's inherent worth and dignity and embrace each other's differences, you can be a candy bag. You can be batgirl or princess. You can even be a hot dog if you want to. But be your best self. Be your true self. Be your actual self. Get to know others and let yourself be known so that we may be changed by each other for the better and for good. Amen, and may it be so.
Please stand as you're comfortable.